Alright, we are at the end of the quilt now, so I'm back to show you what I'm doing to finish the last section of the quilt. So the first thing I did, and I went ahead and did this off camera just to save time, was when I got to the section where I could no longer put a quilt, the quilt frame clips to hold my fabric in place, I put pins in it. And I totally give credit to Valerie at VG Quilting for the idea about pinning your quilt. The only reason I'm doing this, I don't know if it's the same reason she gives, but for me, I have found that if I pin this bottom section just until I can get it basted, it kind of helps me keep my fabric from moving on me. I do need to tighten my frame a little bit here. So that, you know, the fabric doesn't start trying to move. Now, probably the difference in what I do and what Valerie shows you is she uses a lot more pins. For me, I have found that I can do it without using a lot of pins. It might come out better if I did use a lot of pins. This just works for me, so this is what I'm doing. I don't think there's any better way. Everybody has to find their own way that works for them. This works for me. Her way probably means her quilts come out a whole lot better than mine, and that's fine. But what I have found is by making sure I'm using my bungee system to keep my quilt straight every row that I advance, and using the pinning techniques that I've learned from Valerie, is that when I get to the end of my quilt, I don't end up with a whole bunch of extra fabric where things have shifted and moved. Everything is staying flat, everything is staying straight, and then taking this moment to do this last little set of pins just so I can base down this section of my quilt makes a ton of difference. Now, I don't know how Valerie bastes the bottom of her quilt. I honestly have never watched a video about her basting the bottom of the quilt. I've watched how she starts her quilts and how she pins and how she does. So I'm not sure her technique for basting, but when I'm doing the bottom, I like to start kind of in the middle of the bottom of the quilt. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way to the end and then go up. I only have a small section where I need to go up to baste that side of the quilt, but I do this just in case there is any fabric movement. I can kind of shift it out to my edges. This just works for me. It's not necessary. You can start in that section and come down and come all the way across and then go back up if that works for you. I've just found that I like to do it this way. So this is what I'm going to show you. So I'm just going to bring up my bobbin thread, and I'm going to come just really, really close to the edge here, put it on my BSR3, do my 4 stitches per inch. Doesn't matter, you can do 2 stitches per inch. You can do 1 if you want really large stitches to pull out. I thought I had it set to 4 when I was doing some of my quilt today, and ended up having set on 2. It doesn't matter. You're not going to see those stitches at the end because you're either going to pull them out, or you're going to cover them with your binding, or you're going to cut them off when you trim up your quilt if you have to cut a little bit into the quilt. I tried to not have to do that, but sometimes you just have to. So let's get going. All right. So I'm just going to baste the edge right along the edge. Shift up a little hair here. So far, so good. It's coming out pretty good. I'm not really seeing like a lot of gathering of fabric as I'm going. And you can say I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect at basting. Doesn't matter. I kind of wobble a little bit there trying to move my machine because it's tough to move it with the belts engaged. All right, so now I'm going to go up. It's a little bit harder to go up because it's harder to see where the fabric is. But I like this clear foot that I have. I actually have my couching foot on my machine. All right. And now I'm back to where I had basted previous row. And we're bringing that bobbin thread up, cutting it off. And if I have any gathering, it's just a little tiny bit right there, which you're not even going to see when it finishes quilting. So now I'm going to come back to where I started, and we're going to go the opposite direction. Or I could start at the top and come down and come across. I just prefer to do the bottom first because, again, if I have any gathering of fabric, that's where it's going to happen. So let's pull up my bobbin and hold on to all the threads and get started. Come on. For some reason, it's just harder for me to move my machine left to right, more so than up and down. Up and down goes smoother. left and right is a little stiffer on the machine. Maybe coming in a little bit farther on some of those basting stitches than I want to, but it doesn't really matter. Again, I'm either going to trim them out, pull them out, or cover them with binding. Don't want to hit that pin. Alright, and then I'm going to go up the side, make sure my fabric stays under this needle. Might have a little bit of a gather right there, that seam of that border, but I think it actually is okay. Alright, so we've basted up the side. Now let's get ready to reset our design. First thing, let me come back and pull all these pins out. We don't want to forget and leave a pin in here and break a needle or damage our machine by running over it when it's quilting. So let me get rid of all these pins really quickly here. Put them back in my little pin dish. Now I know that Valerie also uses these types of pins. I think a lot of quilters do. I did not learn about these pins from Valerie. I've known about these for a couple of years from, oh, well, I threw one in the floor. We'll come back and find it later. I've learned this a couple of years ago from my long arm experience with someone else recommending those pins. I can't tell you who it was, I don't remember, but I'm just trying to be sure I'm giving credit where I can. Sorry, so let's find our point. Okay, so I've got my laser on the point of my quilt where I want to reset my safe area. Same thing we've been through before. We're going to go over here and tell it that we are doing the last row of our design. So let me DQ the first row, select the last row and cue it up. All right, and again we've got to trim. So I want to select this. I'm going to trim vertically by inverting, and then trim again on the other vertical side. Now I want to trim the horizontal, but what I want to do, first let me set my safe area so then I can move my needle without affecting that. So let me zoom in and reset my safe area. So I know that my needle is sitting, oh, I gotta tell it where I'm doing, snap to point. So I know my needle is sitting there, so I'm gonna tell it, okay. And zoom back out. So we've got our safe area set, except I need to trim the bottom row. So what I want to do is find out exactly where that bottom row is on my machine. So I'm going to do that by moving my sew head to the bottom of my quilt, which is right there. Then I'm going to come back over here and look at my screen and see where my crosshairs are. And I don't know if you can see that, so I'm going to zoom in. So there's my crosshairs. That's the actual bottom of my quilt. When I put in my measurements, it looks like it may have had another inch or so further down than it thinks it is, and I could stitch it at that line and have it go past the bottom of the quilt. I just don't find that necessary for me to do that. So what I'm going to do is when I trim this bottom, I'm going to trim horizontal. This time I'm not using the invert because I'm trimming everything to the bottom. I'm just going to click horizontal and click there. Actually, I'm going to click right where the line where my crosshairs is at, and trim. So this way, now I know when I'm sewing that last row, it's going to sew right to the bottom of my quilt and not go past it. Now, like I said, I could leave it and go past it a little bit just to make sure I have true edge to edge, but by the time I trim up my quilt and put my binding on, it's going to be fine. So that's what I want to do. That's where I want to go. Now I'm ready to sew. I think I've got everything clamped. I've got all the pins out. Let's make sure one more time, no pins. Okay, I think we're set. So now we're just going to tell the machine to go. Let's do this last row at the start point and let the machine move to the start point. All right, pull up the bobbin. Get my top thread down under my foot, hit the go button, and we will do this last row. Alright, so that is it for my quilting tutorial. I hope you find this helpful. I hope I've given proper credit to everybody of where I've learned and gotten my ideas from. I hope that someone finds this helpful, and thanks for watching. Bye, y'all.